Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Carnegie Mellon's Leadership Speaker Series. This is number 2 on our schedule. The first one, if you remember, was Eris Canvas from Westinghouse, and today it's a great honor and pleasure to have Brett Harvey, who's the CEO of Consol Energy. But before I get to Brett and Consol and the role they play in America's energy future, let me say a few words about Carnegie Mellon. The whole goal of this leadership series is to bring really thought leaders to campus and create a forum for open exchange of ideas between the thought leaders, our faculty, our staff, our students, and alumni. And in the past, we have seen some great excitement in the process of doing so, where I have gotten emails after the first leadership series from especially students, where they were really excited that we were able to bring high-profile leaders to Carnegie Mellon. So I'm hoping that we will keep on continuing this. We do it once a semester, so this is the second one. And if once a semester is too few, just let me know. We can do it twice a semester. Michael Ransom has enough time to schedule this more often. So today the talk is going to be on America's future, coal and gas in America's energy future. And energy in this context is very significant for Carnegie Mellon, not just for the U.S., but for Carnegie Mellon. Over the last 5 years or so, we have made a conscious effort to redirect our strategy of investment towards energy. And this is before Obama was elected. Not that we are geniuses, but it was clear to us that there is going to be a problem, especially when it comes to the interaction of energy production, growth of economy, and the environment. And in that context, we started investing in a whole bunch of areas, but especially in the area of renewables and in carbon sequestration. As a point of history, we've had our energy work in this university, mainly in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy and Mechanical Engineering, and somewhat in chemical, for the last 25 to 30 years. In fact, Ed Rubin out here, I hate to tell you how long he's been here, but he came here and he was telling me that he was working on carbon issues and integrated models of energy production when it was not very sexy and nobody wanted to fund him. And now he has to send money away because he can't spend it fast enough. So that's how important energy is to Carnegie Mellon. And we will get to DOE in a second. In the last 12 months, we've been creating a strategy for developing what we call the Energy Futures Institute. This is not futures like futures on the stock market. This is the Future of Energy Institute, is the right way to think about it. And we are trying to build this on 3 pillars. The first pillar is transitioning to a lower carbon, sustainable energy future. And the implication of that is that coal and gas are going to be here for a very, very long time. So the goal is not to get rid of them, but the goal is to find better ways to make them more efficient and to also start integrating renewables. The second pillar is going to be smart grid, because without that you can't integrate the renewables. And the third pillar is going to be innovation in the area of energy. And this is where we've created a great partnership with NETL over the last 4 years. And Scott Clara, who I'll introduce after Brett speaks, has been a great partner from NETL. So Scott, thank you for being here today. So let me now get to the topic of today's conversation, which is Consol's energy approach to powering America and coal and gas for the future. Just a little bit about Consol. I'm sure Brett is going to tell you a lot more than I would, but it is the leading diversified energy company in the U.S. and one of the top diversified fuel producers in the eastern U.S. It helps generate 2/3 of the nation's power supply and mines more high-quality bituminous coal than any other U.S. producer. It is one of the largest independent natural gas exploration companies with nearly 13,000 producing wells. And it's also a leader in industry innovation, developing techniques that enhance the safety and productivity in coal mining to operations for operating the largest private R&D facility devoted exclusively to finding cleaner, more efficient ways of producing energy. And this great company is led by a great person. His name is Brett Harvey. He's the CEO and chairman of Consol Energy. And prior to joining Consol, he was the president and chief executive officer of PacificCorp Energy, which is a subsidiary of PacificCorp located in the western part of the U.S., right, in the California region. He is a fourth-generation coal miner, and he began his career in 1979 with Kaiser Steel Company as a longwall supervisor at the company's Sunnyside Mine in Utah. By 1984, so this is 1979. So 1984, he was elected vice president and general manager. And the reason I emphasize these dates is for the students in the audience, this is a good goal to keep. 5 years from the day you start, at some low level to VP of the company. I think that should be the goal. And for professors in the audience, the idea is how do we teach our students to get there that fast? He's received several awards. Let me just mention one, which is the Percy Nicholls Award, which he received in 2003, which was jointly conferred by the Society for Mining, Metallurgy Exploration Inc. and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers for notable scientific or industrial achievement in the field of solid fuels. A native of Utah, Brett holds a bachelor's degree in mining engineering from the University of Utah. I can go on, but let me just hand it over to Brett and let's see what he has to say. Brett, welcome, sir.
We're going to show a quick film and then I'll get going here.
It should be on here. I had it all lined up. Is this it?
There is a current that runs through life. Throughout history, the progress of man has advanced with the power of electricity, allowing people to live longer, healthier, more productive lives on every level. Coal makes it possible. For thousands of years, mankind was stuck in conditions of poverty and stagnation, ill health, and short lifespans. The modern era dawned in the flash of an electric spark, when man realized that wood burns, but coal creates the steam that ignited the Industrial Revolution. Oil fuels, but coal illuminates the means by which our modern world exists, and enabled technological advances unimaginable 100 years ago. Solar and wind offer promise, but the promise of coal is being kept right now, today, in every developed and developing nation on the face of the earth. The equation is simple: electricity, heat, light, and security, better health, greater wealth, and an immeasurably better quality of life. Only coal can provide enough electricity to energize the world. Coal, the power of now.
I am coal. I'm coal. I am coal. I am coal. I am coal.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and those are pictures to bring back what got us here today. And I think it's important that we understand where we are today versus where we're going. Thank you for the opportunity to be in here to speak to you. I hope it's stimulating and it gives you some ideas. Okay, there we go. I'll get this figured out here in a second. Consol Energy was organized just before the Civil War. And what I like to ask is, what were you doing then? And if you think about it, we are just the stewards of these resources over time. Stewards of technology, stewards of the resources, stewards of who we are in life. And so I'm the steward of Consol Energy at this point in time. I'm very proud of that. We're the largest underground coal producer in the East, largest gas producer in Appalachia, natural gas. And we've emerged as a leading diversified energy producer because the energy is right here under our feet. And that's what built this nation. Now, the history of coal, very diversified. If you think about, I'm a fourth generation miner. I have many relatives that went on before me that passed away in the coal mines because safety was an issue. We've gone beyond that. Consol now is at the point to where we expect nobody to have an accident at any time in our mines ever. Zero is what we believe in. It's what we're driving for. We lead the industry. And we believe it's just a matter of time. And we believe we're the generation that will take it to zero for the next generation to work and extract energy for society with zero accidents. Not zero fatalities, zero accidents. And we really believe we can do that, and we're heading that direction. Now let's talk about our resources. This is a great stratigraphic column of when you look at the Earth. Look at all the pay zones in terms of energy that is right beneath our feet. We have the coal seams, the more shallow areas, and the most dominant coal seam is the Pittsburgh Gate coal seam, which created and fueled the Industrial Revolution. One of the strongest steel-making cities in the world was Pittsburgh, and it was fueled by this coal right here. If you go deeper, you got conventional gas, which has been drilled forever. When I say forever, in the last 100 years in this area. And now, when you go deeper, 7,000, 8,000 feet, you have the Marcellus Shale and other shale formations that harbor gas, which is good for society going forward. Anywhere you drill in western Pennsylvania, northern West Virginia, eastern Ohio, you see the same stratigraphic column of value and what a great resource it is for this country going forward to energize our lives and make things happen. Okay? Why would I be talking about energy if I didn't think it was a growth business? It really is a growth business. When you look at the world itself, and by the year 2035, we expect the energy and the entire world, the appetite to increase by 50%. And in the United States, only 10%. But when you think of only 10% in the United States, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at energy, a well-developed country that is just using incremental energy as they learn to save energy and be more productive with the energy they have, versus nations who don't have any energy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But look at the growth cycle. It's amazing how much it can grow and how much energy this world needs going forward. Now, where's the booming demand? We've all heard about China, we all hear about India. As these countries industrialize, the energy is going to be driven for the need per capita person by these places. Now, where are we going to get this energy, and what form is it going to take? A lot of debate going on about what energy we're going to use. Is it carbon? Is it nuclear? I mean, all that debate's going on. But the reality of it is the entire world needs this energy, and they need that 50% more energy in the next 25 years. Where is it going to come from? Well, let's start with coal. Massive uses right now is happening in the use of coal worldwide. China and India are expected to be the two largest growth areas and continue to be the two largest growth areas, but it's going to exponentially accelerate, especially in India. China's already on that path, and India is right behind it. You have Indonesia and other places like that, same trajectory. You have problems like we saw in nuclear in Japan. That looks like it's going to shift them for demand for coal in the short term, more coal. So what is really going to happen in the world, and where's the demand going to come from, and what are the capabilities of the world to produce this energy versus other forms of energy? Well, let's talk a little bit about natural gas. We always knew the shale was there. We always knew that we had gas in the shale. We didn't know how much. We never had the technology to extract it. Because of great engineers, we figured out how to drill vertically and then drill horizontally and frack those zones to release the gas out of the shales. And now it looks like we probably have at least 30 times more gas in the United States than we thought we had as little as 6 to 7 years ago. Now think about that. When you have this huge reserves of energy that has now been able to be tapped, the world energy is starting to change. And instead of shipping our dollars overseas, we need to learn to extract our energy right at home. Now, when you think of Marcellus Shale and you think of shale plays in this area, think of it in terms of an embryo. It has to be born, it has to be educated, it has to be clothed, it has to be fed, it has to be all of those things before it's a player. So it's just on that. We are just at the beginning of the Marcellus age in terms of what can be done in terms of energy for the United States. But in terms of Western PA, this will be as important to Western PA as steel was in the last century. That's how big this find is. It's amazing. And the demand in the United States for low-cost energy as well as domestic energy or red, white, and blue energy is certainly there. Now, this is a little bit controversial, but I believe this with all my heart. I think that everybody in the world deserves the right to have some access to energy. Now, is it a human right? It's not a legislative right, but I think it's a human right. And if they have the access, they have a better childhood, they live longer, they have cleaner water, they have a better form of education, and there's over almost 2 billion people in the world that don't have access to energy right now. But it's changing because the technology of the human society is changed to the point where information is being spread to people who don't have all of these things, but want these things. And in some cases, it's creating revolutions. And we will see that these forms of energy need to be accessed, and I believe, and Consol believes, it's a basic human right to have access to energy. And the two lowest cost accesses to energy in the entire world are coal and natural gas. Other forms of energy are at a higher cost level. Now, we need to figure that out as a society, or maybe you need to figure out as a student how to make the cost structure of different forms of energy drop to those levels. But until that changes, that's the reality of where we live. Let's talk about the access of the coal right here in Pennsylvania, where it's going today. Down in Greene County, we have a mine called the Bailey Mine. It's the largest exporter of coal out of North America into China right now, right here within an hour's drive. And it's making steel in China with Chinese steel mills, just like it did here in Pittsburgh 100 years ago. So you can see how it's evolving. Europe has a need for energy. South America has a need for energy. Steel mills are being built all over the world for the industrial revolutions in other countries, and they need these resources to go. So that creates an opportunity for Consol to supply coal not only to the local markets, but also around the world. Okay, what about opportunities for natural gas? Like I said, we think we have as much as 30 times more gas than we thought we had 5 to 6 years ago. Now, natural gas, how important is it? It's 20% of our electricity. It heats most of our homes. It's a huge value to the United States, to anybody that has natural gas, and we found 30 times more. It could be an export. Only 5 years ago, we thought we were going to import most of our natural gas. Now we think we're going to export most of our natural gas. And it's all based on a change in technology. Access right under our feet to natural gas that couldn't be extracted before. With the same technology we've used for 100 years in terms of vertical fracking, we just learned how to frack it horizontally. What an amazing change, and these things were developed with engineers trying to find oil in the Gulfs and so forth. We applied it to natural gas, and it's working very well. So we could be an exporter not only of coal, but also of natural gas going forward, because this energy demand worldwide is a common leveling for all humanity. If everybody needs it, the cost structure will move. Once this energy hits the water, whether it's coal in vessels, natural gas in vessels, or oil in vessels, it'll move around the world at very low cost. Now, all this creates environmental issues. Anytime you extract something from the earth, you're affecting something else. And so you have to watch, we have to follow the regulation of which we're under by the federal governments and the state governments. But what I've learned is every generation makes it better. If you go back into the 90s, we are now burning in the United States 1 billion tons of coal a year for our economy. That has doubled over the last 20 years. And the emissions, other than CO2 itself, the emissions of mercury, NOx, SOx, and all of that has dropped 60% because of changes in technology and demand by our society to make coal cleaner. So coal has actually become cleaner, and we're using twice as much as we were 20 years ago. We lead the world in terms of technology and how we use coal. Now, when you hear people talk about coal, they don't talk about it in that context. They talk about coal as what our grandparents did or what the last generation did. I tell you, coal is an energy source of the future. Now, what we'll do is learn to burn it cleaner, with much better technology, coming from schools just like this. And that technology, now think about it. The United States has 30% of all the world's coal energy. It has 50% of the best economic coal in the world. So for us to be debating whether we're going to use coal or not is absolutely throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. It is not something that we should do. And 70% of that coal is owned by the federal government, which means it's owned by us as citizens. So for us to look at this resource and lock it up and not use it for the good of society is absolutely the wrong thing. All we need is technology. And that technology is to burn it cleaner, to sequester carbon, and do all those things that create a lot of value for society. Now, regulation, I think when we talk about regulation, sometimes we live in a society where we're so far ahead that our regulations burden what we've been doing, and it drives the cost up. And I'll give you an example. The cost of a ton of coal 7 years ago in the United States was about $30 a ton. The cost of a ton of coal today is about $60 a ton and rising. And it's because the cost of regulation is rising. Now, are we making it better environmentally? Sure we are. Are we making it tougher on the economy to compete worldwide? We are. So that new technology that we're talking about has to be competitive. And it has to be with natural gas and with coal. Because if we take these valuable resources and we lock them up and then try to compete with the rest of the world, all we do is drive the price of what we're doing up. And that's an important thing to understand. Now, let's talk about energy policy. Our country does not have an energy policy, has not had an energy policy. And I would say in some senses, it's almost been an anti-energy policy in terms of we haven't focused on our own resources and applied technology for the good of the citizens. What we've done is put regulation after regulation on top of what was already in place, made it more expensive, and we have a very scattered energy policy. In fact, our energy policy would almost look like countries who don't have any energy domestically. If Japan had our resources, they would conquer the world just with their own industry, but they have to import everything that they have. And we have it right here under our feet, but we debate whether we want to use it or not. So the energy policy in the United States has to have and embrace technology and fossil fuels to move forward. If we don't do that, we're leaving all that valuable energy in the ground, and we're taking away our edge compared to the rest of the world in terms of competition. So that's got to be addressed. We really need a real portfolio of energy choices. Now, it took us 200 years to get where we're at in terms of energy. We went through the Industrial Revolution, where we're at today. Think of all the things that you use in your life that use energy. The heater of your home, the charging of your electronic products, the movement of your cars. All of those things take energy. And if you change the value of that, 10 years ago, the value of a car coming off of the lines of Detroit was 29% energy if you looked at all the energy processes in making the steel and extracting all the processes. If you change that very much, you make that car so it's never competitive against with other countries. So if you double your cost of energy, you're going to drive the cost of that vehicle up. And that's just what we looked at in terms of a vehicle. What happens to every product that you have? So we got where we are because we used what we had. We had fossil fuels. We invented nuclear energy. There are issues around that. Renewables are on their way. But what I'm telling you today is it takes a combination, a portfolio of all these energies based on where they're at in the world and what technology is available. If we don't do it that way, if we choose one over the other, we will fail or drive our cost structure out of the way. We didn't get where we're at in this world because we're stupid. And for us to put regulation on top of it that doesn't be rational about what's really in place and what the value of these things are, eventually will hurt us. Let's see, I'm going to get to the back of this here. Here's some conclusions I want to leave with you. Safety is the #1 value of Consol. We shouldn't be extracting anything without the safety of the people. We have 9,000 people working every day. We expect no one to get hurt, but we expect them to produce the largest amounts of energy in the eastern United States. Fossil fuels are and will continue to be essentially for the quality of life that we have today. So if you expect your quality of life to stay the same, you're going to have to use fossil fuels, but we should be smart enough to use them in a different way. Just like we had distributed coal in everybody's house 1 generation ago. Now it's centralized somewhere else. And now we're going to learn to capture the carbon out of it. So every generation is going to make this better, but we have to have it. Access to electricity, I believe, is a basic human right. Consol itself is perfectly positioned to respond to the marketplace and take advantage of what we have today. And it's right here under our feet. It's an amazing story of what's actually in Western PA. Fossil fuels can and will be and find ways to be used more environmentally safe. Because fossil fuels has got us to where we can make those decisions today. Domestic energy policy should embrace fossil fuels for the good of the people as well as the good of the economy and the good of the environment. They all have to be tied together. That's why we need an energy policy that addresses all of these together. And the last thing I want to leave with you is we need all forms of energy. But I believe probably the most important form of energy is the human energy, and that goes right back to the safety part. Should we be doing any of this if anybody takes any risks? Or should we apply the human energy that we see at this university to solve all these problems and use all the resources that we have? And I think it's important because if we push some of these resources aside, we're only hurting ourselves and our ability to compete worldwide. So I thank you for this time. I hope I've stimulated some thoughts for you, and please feel free to ask some questions when we're ready. Thank you.
You might want to take your seat at the podium. Brett will be joined by our panelists, and as soon as I introduce our panelists, we'll be ready for Q&A. So in the meantime, be thinking about questions. Let me start with Scott Clara, who's one of our panelists today. He's the Deputy Director of NETL, which is the National Energy Technology Laboratory, located right here in our backyard called South Park. Scott's been there for 25 years. He's had 25 years of diversified experience in various companies. And what I didn't quite get it is he was 7 years at AT&T, and I'm trying to figure out how did AT&T lead to NETL. But one of these days I'll ask him that question. And he was also at Calgon Carbon Corporation. He's been at NETL for more than 20 years. He has a BS and an MS from University of Pittsburgh in chemical engineering and also in petroleum engineering. One of the things I have to tell you about Scott, I kind of mentioned that in my introduction of Brett, but About 4 years ago, Scott Clara, Anthony Cugini, Andy Gallman, and myself, I don't know what is it that we were drinking, basically cooked up this NETL RUA partnership. And Anthony then became the director, and Scott became the deputy just about a year ago. So Scott is now leading that partnership for us. So thank you, Scott, for all your support. Next one in line is Dr. Edward Rubin. Ed Rubin, who I kind of alluded to early on, he is the alumni professor of environmental engineering and public policy in the College of Engineering at Carnegie Mellon. And Ed has been here for 30 plus years, focusing on the area of environment and energy and many, many different aspects of that. Ed serves on several committees, but the most notable one is the one that he's serving on right now, which is the NRC committee studying climate change, mitigation policy, energy R&D planning, and alternative transportation technologies. And Ed also was one of the lead authors of a chapter in the famous IPCC report that won the Nobel Prize with Al Gore. What did Al Gore do in that report? I guess nothing. Okay. I thought so, but I thought I might as well check. Last but not the least is Kelvin Gregory. Kelvin, are you there? Oh, there he is. He's an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering. He teaches a course in environmental microbiology for engineers and fluid mechanics. And his research lies in biotechnology, biogeochemistry, with a focus on the interaction between microorganisms and geochemistry, which influence the fate of environmental pollution. One of his research projects is actually the Marcellus Shale. So with that in mind, let's open the panel to questions and answers. Do I see any hands rising out there? Okay. Is it a good question? Okay, since there are several questions out here, I think I'll hold off on my questions. Yes, sir, go for it.
We have microphones too, up here and over here.
Okay, do you want me to come and speak to the microphone? Am I loud enough?
Yeah, you're loud enough, in a good way.
I thought it was very interesting in talking about the health benefits of coal. Pittsburgh has the highest fine particulate matter pollution. And I was wondering what the coal industry was doing to try to offset some of those issues.
I guess that's Brett, right?
It clearly is a function of combustion, and I talked briefly about it. When you look at a couple generations ago, everybody had a coal furnace in their house, then went to natural gas. Then we distributed the generation. Then we put scrubbers on the power plants, and now we're looking at particulate matter beyond that. And I think it's a function of a natural capital solution. As we demand more from our resources and demand more about our clean air, there'll be a solution to that. The particulates are a matter of filtering it as it comes out, and there'll be another wave of that, and that's typically done by the utilities. Now, when I talk about health as it relates to the use of energy, it's clearly been proven worldwide that the use of energy per capita creates a much healthier society. And is there an optimum level? Sure there is. Do we get better every generation? That's true. So I think the particulates are somewhat related to coal burn, as well as transportation of automobiles and our society. We need to address all those.
So Scott, let me follow up on that question, and let me ask you this question. You lead a large research operation at NETL. Clearly that is focused on better utilization of coal. So can you tell us, in the context of what Brett was talking about in his talk and this question that was posed, what are the research issues that NETL is looking at that's going to help us get to a better future?
Yeah, I think historically, and Brett addressed some of this, that the technologies for things like NOx and SOx and even particulate matter that he mentioned now, there are technology sets out there that can do a tremendously good job. As he indicated, that coal use is up, emissions are substantially down, and that technology it can get better and better. And as Brett mentioned, there are cost trade-offs and et cetera that are used with those technologies. And historically at NETL, we were key in developing those technology sets. Relative to coal currently, the key issue on our plate right now is really CO2. And so we're in the process of developing suites of technologies around the terms carbon capture and storage. And some of you that are familiar with it, it'll ring true. And with carbon capture and storage, the big issues are that you can capture CO2 from coal burning energy facilities right now, but it's very expensive. And so we're looking at revolutionary technologies that will drive that cost down to a reasonable and acceptable value. On the storage side, we're looking to identify storage opportunities. Geologic sequestration is the key storage opportunity right now relative to safely sequestering this CO2 for potentially forever. And so we're looking at identifying those sequestration opportunities as well as developing all the imaging tools and computer modeling tools, reservoir simulators, to ensure that it's safe and secure. And so that's really the current thrust relative to coal research, at least within our facility.
Yes,
I am Leela Murthy, Professor of Biology at the Community College of Carnegie County. I just returned from a trip to the Amazon rainforest, and I saw firsthand that there was massive deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. So what concerns me is that these forests, they mitigate carbon dioxide, and by deforestation and by building of roads, which leads to loss of habitation, we are not only creating a loss of biodiversity, but loss of trees that are playing a very important role in mitigating carbon dioxide. Now, by burning coal, we are increasing these greenhouse gases. How can we address this problem of preventing deforestation, at the same time reducing the level of carbon dioxide in the air?
Well, I think I'll give you a technology answer, and then we could open it up, and Brett and others can give you some different perspective. But I think the bottom line is there's no silver bullet. So when you look at mitigation strategies for CO2, all of those things play a key factor. And it's important into the future, if there are future carbon constraints, that it's going to take truly this technology set combined, whether it be going to renewables, whether it be looking at coal with carbon capture and storage, looking at forestation, agricultural procedures, processes, technologies, things such as that. And it really will require every one of those to be pushed pretty hard to make it all work.
Let me go to Ed Rubin. Ed, you work in the carbon sequestration area for several decades now, and I've heard now several times that CO2 sequestration is going to be an important technology. So can you reflect on how far can we go? What is the future of coal? And how far can we go with CO2 sequestration, both in terms of getting it out of the atmosphere and at a reasonable price, which is zero?
Because it's reasonable.
Another softball question for you. Maybe we should talk first about the future of coal. We do a lot of modeling work here. I don't know if you all know, we have a crystal ball that forecasts the future of coal with 100% accuracy. I consulted it late last week. The answer is, and I'm sure this is going to be true, coal use will continue to go up or down or stay about where it is now. That's the answer we got. A number of factors will determine how that plays out and what the role of this technology is. Actually, in the last couple of years, we've seen coal use go down and CO2 emissions in this country have gone down. But it isn't the way we would like to have it. That was because of the economic turndown. We don't want to reduce CO2 emissions by putting people out of work and slowing down the economy. So one of the key factors that certainly will affect the role of coal in this country, let me talk about this country as opposed to the worldwide, unless we get some questions, is how quickly the economic recovery proceeds. And there's a lot of uncertainty in when we'll start to see an upward rise in CO2. It could be as recent as early as next year. It might not occur for 10 years, depending on the pace of growth. Whatever happens, the role of technology for coal use and for other energy forms that coal competes with is going to be rather critical. The carbon sequestration technology that Scott just talked about today would add considerable cost to the power plants that would use it. By the time you roll that in, ratepayers would see a much smaller amount, but over time it would rise. So how that plays out remains to be seen. It depends on how aggressive the R&D budgets are and what kinds of regulatory pushes there are that are reasonable and can help promote technology innovation as opposed to unreasonable in ways that would stifle those things. It'll also depend a lot on the price and cost of other alternative energy systems. Natural gas right now, everybody's very bullish on it. We'll hope that happens, but we have seen bullish times in the past, not perhaps quite as bullish as now, but things that turned around. So depending on how that plays out, how the nuclear power industry in this country reacts to the unfortunate events in Japan, all of that will affect that considerably. How close to zero we can get, Pradeep? I think we can thermodynamically get pretty close, but maybe not quite all the way.
Okay, so we can get to epsilon and make it competitive, right? So let me, actually, Brett's talk had two components, coal and gas, right? I don't see any hands being raised out there. I need to wake you up. Are you going to ask about coal or gas?
A more general question.
Okay, go for it, then I'll ask about gas.
Hi, my name is Kelly Klein. I'm a PhD student in engineering and public policy. And I think we've heard from two of the other panelists, but not the third so far. And I was wondering, since Ed, you just complained about getting softballs, here's perhaps more of a hardball question. If you, given your expertise, were to have an extended discussion with Brett on perhaps one of the things he said in his presentation that maybe you don't disagree with, but you just want to have an extended discussion on, what might that be?
We already started that discussion just before this meeting.
It will be Huck and Consol help us more on our research.
Started that one too.
First question was, how deep are your pockets?
Sorry, yeah, go for it.
It really has to do with the pace of innovation and the role of regulation in society. So there's the old adage about where you stand depends on where you sit. And not everybody in this room sits or stands necessarily in the same place, but we all sit in this country, and the trick is to get that, it's the Goldilocks problem, the just right balance. So I would push on Consol and others who are producers of CO2 to be a little less patient and a little more aggressive in both funding and participating in the research that's going to be needed to develop the kinds of technologies that will, in fact, the future of coal will depend heavily on. So I think it's the rate of change issue that we're really talking about. The other thing I'd probably welcome, I just have to find some opportunity to say it, and even with my good friends from DOE sitting next to them, we tend to use this word clean energy in a variety of ways. So one thing I didn't hear in Brett's talk and a lot of other talks is more about the one form of energy that I would consider the only real clean energy. If clean means the absence of environmental impacts, I don't think anything we do on the supply side, be it coal, nuclear, renewables, would meet my definition of clean. The only clean energy I know of is the energy we don't use and don't need. So let's not forget that it's our demands for energy that really drive everything on the supply side. And let's not forget there's also a lot of room and a lot of opportunities for reducing the needs for energy while not sacrificing the quality of life that we all aspire to. So energy efficiency, energy conservation really ought to be the first thing that occurs to us when we think about clean energy.
Thanks, Ed. Let me try to change the conversation to gas, because that was the second part of Brett's talk. So this is an IT person. I'll get to you guys in a second. 1 and 2, right, after I'm done. So remember, I'm an IT person, information technology, so just with that, the question I'm going to ask, just put it in that context, as in it's a dumb question. Well, so let me start with, if I look at the cost of producing energy from coal or gas, I think clearly on a per unit basis, coal is much cheaper today than gas is. And then I'm told that we have about 250 years of coal and about 100 years of gas based on the new finds. And then I'm also told that until gas comes up to about $6 per unit or something like that, it's not economically feasible to produce energy on a profitable basis. So I'm trying to figure out, why are we even talking about gas when we have 250 years of coal? That's for you, Brad.
Well, you can see I have a split personality on that, but I would say that we think, as it comes to electricity itself, gas has traditionally been about 3 or 4 times the cost of coal. And because of the change in regulation, we see that the next round of generation in the United States will be gas generation. That's part of the reason we got back into the gas business, because we saw that as the next round. Coal still has some technology issues to overcome in terms of how we deal with CO2 and how we deal with particulates that we just talked about and other things. We think after about 5 to 7 years, coal will come back with some new technology, and that technology will drive another round of what we would call future gen coal plants that have near zero emissions. But until then, we think gas will fill the void, and the cost structure. But the cost structure will drive the cost of electricity up, because that coal is by far the lowest cost fuel in the world and in the United States.
Oh, okay. So we'll come to that in a second, but let me get to Kelvin Gregory, who's the other panelist who has not spoken as yet. Turns out he works on Marcellus Shale. So Kelvin, help me understand, or help us understand, if we were to go and frack all this shale gas, what would the big issues be, and how can we do that in a sustainable manner that kind of makes sense for the environment and also from an economic basis?
Well, so as we just talked very briefly, that it's really about cost per unit extraction is really going to be one of the big drivers for development of the Marcellus. One of the major costs are the potential for environmental externalities, and in particular the management of water. Hydraulic fracturing uses a few million gallons of water, of which maybe 10 or 30% of it flows back to the surface, containing a lot of minerals that dissolved from the deep subsurface into that water. And that high TDS, that is salts and metals, are difficult to manage. The technology that came to the Marcellus from the development of the Barnett Shale down in Texas largely relied on just disposal and deep well injection. And Texas had 50 to 80,000 deep well injection sites, whereas Pennsylvania has about 7. And so there is a question of how do you manage that water. And the unique infrastructure of Pennsylvania, its unique water needs, have given rise to solutions that address both the environmental impacts of Marcellus Shale development, but also some of these cost issues that are going to be key to its development, and that is the technology that is reuse of flowback water for subsequent hydraulic fracture. This both minimizes the potential for environmental impact, and that's trucking water around or potentially disposing these things in publicly owned treatment plants or dilution and so forth, but also reduces the cost associated with development, because this is water that now does not have to be treated and disposed of. So you can greatly reduce not only the amount of water that's extracted, but the amount of water that then needs to be treated and thereby disposed, reducing road traffic and so forth. So this is the kind of technology that is evolving from the unique geology and geography and infrastructure of Pennsylvania that's enabling the Marcellus to be developed in a sustainable manner.
Oh, I see. So let's see, there was a question there.
Yeah, well, my question is highly related to yours, actually. More on these recent reports that natural gas burns much more cleanly than coal. But when you extract it from shale, mostly because you lose a lot of methane during the extraction process, it actually has as large of an impact on climate change as coal does from start to finish. Mostly because methane has a lot higher impact on climate change than the CO2, but a lot shorter as well. So that environmental benefit is equal or not there. Coal is cheaper. Coal has infrastructure built in. We're not putting pipelines, not putting storage facilities, not making bets like that. I just don't get, from a corporate standpoint, the attraction to natural gas, or what the selling point is.
You make a good point. That study, we questioned some of the science in that study, but we're looking at it. We have our own R&D department. We're looking at it just to make sure. Every extraction process has a footprint. But when you look at the CO2, and if you look at what the federal government's driving in terms of CO2 release per unit in a power plant, it ignores some of the things we saw in that study. And it really drives economic decisions towards producing electricity directly with its picking fuels based on regulation rather than using reason in terms of economics. And I would rather be on the side of doing the right thing, but sometimes regulation gets ahead of the science of it. And there is an impact to putting pipelines in and so forth. And we're seeing that in Western PA now, and there's a lot more to come with that. Just like there was an impact of the steel business, and all that has to evolve. But it really is going to take both these fuels, I think, to make a good balanced portfolio, but for the right reasons of that.
Let's see, there was a question back there somewhere. Yeah.
No, it's okay, it's the same question.
Great minds think alike. That's perfect.
Let me add something on that
Yeah,
as well.
sure, Scott.
When it comes to carbon capture and storage technologies, they're often thought of as a coal solution, but the reality is it's a CO2 solution.
Yes.
And so the technology sets that are coming out of coal for capture, for example, many of those are completely applicable to natural gas-fired electric generation or other natural gas usage. And as well as on the sequestration side, a molecule of CO2 is a molecule of CO2 if you have a secure storage site. And so the bottom line is when we talk about CCS technologies, I think a key is not to get coal-centric. And the bottom line is that same technology set would almost surely be deployed to a natural gas fleet of power plants into the future as well. And that will obviously all depend on any timing and severity of any drivers to do that. So again, just a point there to add as well that same technology set's important to natural gas.
Can I?
Yes, so go for it.
Let me just add a comment to the question on the life cycle analysis. I will agree wholeheartedly with Brett. It's the study from Cornell that's gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of days. I've been involved in some other study of natural gas resources where the same issue has come up. What I've learned is that there is a terribly small amount of data associated with those methane readings from gas production. There's a lot more effort going into trying to refine that. The studies I've seen, though, even accounting for those data as reported by the EPA on a life cycle basis, in fact, gas still comes out ahead of coal when gas is used in an efficient new power plant. There's still a difference. Having said that, if I put even today's carbon capture and sequestration plants on a coal plant, in fact, coal is cleaner than gas in terms of its carbon emissions, 3 or 4 times cleaner. So ultimately, for either gas or coal to be viable in a world where our goal is going to be to reduce overall carbon emissions by something like 80% by the middle to the end of this century, both of those technologies will need to capture and sequester carbon. On that basis, they look as green as just about any of the renewables or nuclear.
Thanks, Ed. Any other questions? Is that a quick follow-up? Because then there's a question here.
Follow-up, because I'm coming at it as much of a policy question than an environmental question. Like, how would you make those decisions? Like with a Marcellus shale well, you don't get your payback in 6 months. You get it in like 20 years. And to actually make that investment decision, not knowing what the national policy will be 20 years from now, I just don't know how you go through that thought process of here's where I put my money.
There will be no policy 20 years from now, just like today.
Well, actually, a Marcellus well has a payback much quicker than a coal investment, almost years quicker. And so the gas decision really is one that's driven by diversification as well as the access that we didn't have to the gas. And so there is a real demand for natural gas that's not for coal, and we'll fill that market with that. So that's an economic decision. The coal markets are really driven by what do the power plants want to do and what's the export capability. But a coal mine takes almost 7 years to permit, and And that investment's way out there versus gas. So gas is much closer to rising in terms of return on investment.
So you got to remember, one of the things that at least I read embedded in Brett's talk, it's not just about CO2 reduction, it's also about energy security.
Yeah.
As in, we spend a lot of money sending it across the pond in places that are not very friendly to us. And we are making them wealthy to come back at us, right? So I think that was the other point in your talk, at least I thought was there. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you.
Gabriela.
Oh, Gabriela, I didn't recognize you.
My background is in electric power systems, and when we want to integrate more, let's say, wind generation, we need faster ramping generation in order to balance it, which is given with natural gas. But with coal, you have like flatter, you're not able to ramp as quickly. How much does that impact your decisions in going for coal or for natural gas if we consider that we want to have more wind generation?
Right. For every set of wind generation, there has to be a gas backup. And so that's one of the reasons we got into the gas business, because we knew that backup would be in place. And when the wind doesn't blow, people still want that electricity. And if coal is at a base level that's always running, which is typically, the peaking system has to be, when wind is not operating, gas has to fill it. And because the demand, when you hit that switch, you really expect it to be there. And gas, so our models show that every time you build a wind package, you have to put a gas package right behind it for when the wind's not blowing. Yeah.
Unless you have storage.
Storage is, okay, we can debate that, but we don't have enough time right now.
So I'm told that Brett does have a scheduling constraint out here, but I think we'll stay for like 2 or 3 more minutes, maybe no more than 5. Is that okay, Brett?
That's fine.
Andy?
Yeah, I was going to ask, so we hear a lot about gas here, especially because of Marcellus, and it's going to create huge advantages for the United States. But there must be shale gas distributed all around the world that nobody's had access to before. And so whatever competitive advantage we have is going to be fairly short. How much is out there in the rest of the world, and how long will it take for them to start pumping it as fast as we do?
Well, our competitive advantage really is coal. Okay.
On the gas side.
Because of cost structures. The gas side, because of the finding of shale gas, Europe is now changing. Everybody who has shales are now changing their economics. Europe has always been held hostage because they ran out of coal. They mined it out. They went to Russian gas. Russia used that as leverage politically and economically on Europe. Now they've found their own gas. They're using it as leverage back. So the whole world's changing on this gas issue. Where are you going to use gas? Where are you going to use coal? If I'm in the deep hinterlands of China or India, and I just want electricity, I'm going to go to coal first, and I'm not worried about what we're talking about. I want electricity. And remember, that's 2 billion people. And they also read all this off the internet, because they have internet even before electricity. It's interesting how that works, but these people want what we have, and coal's going to be the base driver of that. And so coal really is the common denominator of humanity in terms of energy, and then the rest of it is technology to make it better for everybody.
So there's an interesting point, Brett, that you bring up where in Africa I know there are places which have cell phone access but no electricity. And there's a business in taking your cell phone and taking it 30 miles away to get it charged and bring it back. And people are actually making some good living doing that. Paul?
In the keynote, I think we heard discussed about the regulations were being imposed, but elsewhere in the keynote there was a figure about like 60% more efficient, or there was some figure about the effectiveness.
NOx reduction.
For the cost.
Right.
So
NOx.
I guess, is it possible to look back in terms of historically and make some kind of reasonable judgment about the regulations, the effects of regulations, whether they've been a net good or a net bad, so that we can talk about regulations going forward?
These are the experts here on the regulation side and how to deal with it. I'm just going to say from a business perspective, regulation, I think, makes us better every generation. I just don't want it to get to the point to where it's so far ahead of us that it hurts us. And that's the concern from the business side. You might want to address the technology versus regulation.
Yeah, there is a lot to learn, and I'm going to let Ed and maybe Calvin make some comments, but Ed for sure. relative technology-wise to looking back at learning curves for analogous technology types. And us learning from that and maybe even accelerating, or definitely at a minimum understanding when technologies at a given point in time could potentially be ready and available. So we do look back historically at these learning curves and try to relate it to the state of development that we have today in determining when a technology might be available. And Ed happens to be an expert in that area and looking at these past learning curves on the technologies.
Ed, you want to add to that a little bit?
Yeah, historically, it depends on the time frame over which you look. We've done, for example, a number of detailed case studies over the last 30 years on not CO2, but SO2. Sulfur dioxide was a major air pollutant, the first to be regulated in starting in the 1970s. It led to a technology that is now widely deployed on power plants called scrubbers or flue gas desulfurization systems. The bad news was that initially those costs went up considerably higher than what had been anticipated. The cheap systems just didn't work. The industry didn't understand the technology, didn't understand a lot of the chemistry of the details. And by the time they did, we had a more expensive system. The good news is that those more expensive systems did a great job of capturing the CO2, and that over time, once a market was established, competition, R&D, substantially lowered the price and cost of these technologies, such that within a time frame of about 2 decades, the cost was half what it was at the beginning, almost back to the early levels. So it all has to, and there are a number of other industries that have similar kinds of histories. One of the areas where we didn't see that innovation in this country was in NOx control. We didn't have stringent regulations for NOx. Japan did, and then Europeans did. And that's where the technology that we wound up buying 20 years later was originated. So the other message is that the companies that innovate tend to be market leaders. They tend to bring in wealth to the country. And what we're trying to figure out now is what's the just right rate in terms of a whole variety of things we can do on the carbon front to get a similar positive result.
Thanks, Ed. Now that's a really interesting topic, which is the role of regulation and policy and innovation. I think we can talk another 2 more hours on that issue. But having said that, I know we are running a bit late and Brett has to leave. So please join me in thanking Brett and our panelists.